Thousands of badgers are in the firing line as a mass cull gets underway in Gloucestershire and Somerset. The National Farmers Union say it is essential to stop the spread of bovine TB among England's cattle herds. But protesters have turned out in their hundreds, calling it inhumane and misguided, while the RSPCA insists that culling is not the answer and could make things even worse. From Gloucestershire, our science editor Tom Clark reports.
The Somerset badger cull zone covers 100 square miles, and within 6 weeks, several thousand badgers must be shot. Despite the massive scale of the operation, it didn't start with a bang. Protesters scouring the woods overnight in both Somerset and Gloucestershire zones saw and heard nothing. But they remain determined to see culling is stopped.
We've been doing this for weeks, we know where all the sets are, and we are convinced we can stop it, and we will take all means that we have to do it.
For their part, cattle farmers have watched bovine TB march steadily through herds in England and Wales for decades. Now tens of thousands of cattle are slaughtered every year at taxpayers' expense. So now they've got their badger cull. Is today a day for celebration?
I don't think there's anyone celebrating about this, but I think farmers are certainly tinged with a relief that from that long dark tunnel of trying to deal with bovine tuberculosis, that actually that cycle of infection in the wildlife, from the cattle to wildlife, from the wildlife back to the cattle, that actually we can break that now.
James Small keeps 250 of these white-bred beef shorthorns on his farm in the Mendip Hills. Last year he lost 2 to TB. Movement restrictions have just been lifted on his herd. In his mind, the cull is long overdue.
Had the government had strength of resolve years ago to actually get on top of this, we wouldn't have been having to look at these measures now.
So far, the feared clash between activists and badger cullers was yet to materialise. This evening, a camp of just 8 people near Minehead was the focus of protest against the Somerset cull. But the government will remain under wider pressure to prove a cull will actually reduce bovine TB. Today being forced to admit they weren't testing culled badgers for the disease.
Badgers are tested for the humaneness of the culling operation, so that requires a certain kind of post-mortem, and as a result of that it's not really possible to do proper post-mortems for tuberculosis.
The only real proof of whether the wholesale culling of a protected species is worth it will be in the beef and dairy herds of the West Country. After all the political and emotional pain this cull has caused, our farmers will be praying that it works. Tom Clark, Channel 4 News in Somerset.
And with me now is the Environment Secretary, Owen Paterson. Now, as Tom was explaining, this cull's only taking place in limited pilot areas at the moment. What measures do you have in place to test whether or not it has reduced bovine TB in those areas once the cull's been finished?
Well, we know perfectly well from the experience of the last government's culls and from very clear evidence overseas from a whole range of countries.
But we won't need to take evidence from overseas when we've got the evidence in this country. The cull's going ahead. How much does it have to reduce bovine TB by before you then introduce the cull across the whole of England?
Well, if I just finish, there is clear evidence that you cannot get rid of bovine tuberculosis in cattle if you only bear down on disease in cattle, as we've tried to do in this country in the last 15 years. If you look at the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and above all, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland had a very similar problem to us. Since they began culling diseased badgers, they've seen a remarkable reduction of disease in cattle.
Okay,
but very importantly, they have seen much healthier badgers. The average Irish badger is 1 kilogram heavier than before the cull. And they're going to arrive where we want to get to, which is to have healthy cattle living alongside healthy wildlife.
And you'll be able to produce evidence from this country, presumably once this pilot cull is over, that says it has reduced bovine TB by however much percent, 15%, 20%, this has been effective. When will you be able to tell us whether or not this cull has worked at reducing the TB?
No, the purpose of this cull is to show that shooting by trained marksmen under very carefully controlled circumstances is humane and effective. We know perfectly well that you can reduce TB, as we've seen in those countries I cited.
So why aren't you measuring for it in this country with these pilot culls?
Because that has been proven already by the previous culls, and it's been proven by the experience in the Republic of Ireland, which has seen a 23% reduction in disease in cattle since they began culling badgers. That's been proven. The purpose of these 2 culls is to show that this method of removing diseased animals is humane, efficient and effective.
So you're going to recommend, if you do recommend it, to spread this cull across the whole of England with no statistics whatsoever that show whether or not it's been effective at reducing TB in the pilot areas?
No, we know perfectly well in the last culls, however ineffectively they were carried out, saw a 60% reduction in the main area, but in the core area, a 28% reduction. We know that an effective cull in the Republic of Ireland has delivered a 23% reduction in disease in cattle.
Okay.
And you compare that with Northern Ireland, where the disease is rampant as it is here. But we will roll out these culls, should they prove to be effective and efficient, in the hotspot areas. We know that the disease is almost out of control in parts of the southwest and Gloucestershire. We cannot go on as we are. We've lost 300,000 cattle in the last 10 years.
Okay.
If we go on as we are, it'll cost us £1 billion. We won't have a cattle industry, and we'll have very, very sick wildlife.
One last question, Minister. Have you seen enough evidence to justify military intervention in Syria? Will you be voting for it on Thursday?
Well, the National Security Council is meeting tomorrow, and Parliament will be recalled on Thursday, and Parliament will make its decision.
You'll be voting on Thursday?
We will all be voting at 10 o'clock on Thursday.
Have you made your mind up which way you'll be voting?
Well, I'm a loyal member of the government, and the National Security Council will be looking at the very difficult options facing this country. But what we've seen in the past week is horrific, and we will wait to see what those proposals are, which will be presented to Parliament on Thursday. And I think it's absolutely right that the Prime Minister has recalled Parliament.
Okay. Owen Paterson, thank you very much for that.